Hello again. In this video, we're going to take a look at Flash Catalyst's timeline and how I can choreograph objects using transitions. In this project, we're going to pick up exactly from where we left off in the last one. So I'm actually in the welcome state of that original project that we created. So I actually have opened up the Timelines panel to illustrate a little bit about what's been happening behind the scenes with Flash Catalyst. The Timelines panel is always updated with how I actually build out my project. As we keep adding objects, removing objects, changing location, rotating, resizing, or making other modifications, the Timelines panel is always monitoring what we're doing. The Timelines panel is allowing us to choreograph how we get from one point of our application to the other. That's why it's monitoring what we're doing, so it's keeping track of all the changes we're making to our project in each state along the way. Flash Catalyst is built on the basis of origin to destination. So regardless if I'm doing transitions or something else that's called an action sequence, everything is always going to be based on where I start from and where I'm going to. The user interface of the Timelines panel is actually built specifically with that in mind. If you remember, when we first introduced the Timelines panel, we were talking about the state transitions over here on the left-hand side. These represent where I'm going from, or the origin state, and then where I'm going to, or the destination state. In this case, I'm going from welcome to eat. So whatever is going to be on welcome is going to be on the left-hand side. Whatever is going to be eat is going to be on the right-hand side. And that's reflected inside the actual Timelines panel to the right of that. Welcome and all the objects that are part of the welcome state are displayed on the left. Eat and all the things that are on the eat panel are on the right. What we're going to do is build and actually choreograph how I want things to fade out or fade in as I go from welcome to eat. So let's take a look again at what's actually on the welcome and eat states before we get going. So in the welcome, I have my header graphics at the top, my header text is at the top, those divider lines, and then I have these buttons welcome, eat, and watch. I have this placeholder that we created in the center that represents that animation that's going to be made later on. I'm then going to go into the eat state. The eat state has the data list that we created in the last video, and then those same text and horizontal lines that were in the previous state. Now, because the text and the lines are the same in the welcome to the eat state, they're not displayed in the Timelines panel. That's because there's no change. There's no need to actually animate them. If I made any changes to those in the eat or the welcome state, it would actually capture that and would allow me to choreograph how I want those changes to take place. In this case, I have two things that I'm animating. I have the placeholder animation graphic on the welcome state, and I have the data list, which is on the eat state. By default, it automatically knows that things are either going to fade out or fade in, because the opacity has either been turned on or turned off. You notice that right now, the fade in and fade out states that are displayed here are very, very short in length. That's because by default, all the animations that take place in the transitions originally start off as instantaneous, meaning that they are 0 seconds in duration. What we're going to do is modify those and choreograph how we want things to come in or come out. So with this placeholder animation, that's going to fade out because it's displaying on the welcome state and is becoming transparent on the eat state. We can smooth this transition out by doing a couple things. We can click on the Smooth Transitions button down here at the bottom. I can click and drag this to actually change the duration. Or, with that particular effect selected, I can go into the Properties panel and then change its duration. So let's actually set that to 1/2 second. So I can do that by clicking in here and actually putting in 0.5, but it's already set to that, so we can leave that alone. The other one is fade in. Now that's going to be fading in the data list that's part of the eat state. Let's go into our Properties panel and put in 0.5. You notice that we're working with seconds here. That's because Catalyst is based in seconds. So if you're used to frames in Flash Professional, you'll find that in Flash Catalyst, everything is done in terms of seconds. All right, so we've built this transition here where we have the data list fading in and the placeholder animation fading out. Now, Flash Catalyst gives us the ability to preview all these transitions directly in the product. So click this play button here, and you can actually see it fade in and fade out directly on the stage. Now, this is having both of those effects happening at the same time. I might not necessarily want that to happen. I might want one effect to happen first and then the other effect to happen later. I can click and drag these effects to change their start times. So I might want the data list to fade in after the placeholder animation is faded out. So I can click and drag this so that one happens right after the other. Let me preview this again. As you can see, the placeholder animation fades out first, and then the data list fades in after that. Now, if you have a bunch of objects that you want to have do the same type of thing, where they're either doing their origin modifications first and then their destination modifications last, you can actually do that automatically using the Smart Smoothing feature. That's part of the Smooth Transitions button. If I select that, and in this case I want to overwrite my existing effects, I can have the entire thing happen over half of a second, and I click OK. You'll notice that the fade out and fade in are automatically created as a quarter of a second, since I want the entire thing to take place over a half second. So if I have dozens of objects that are either on the origin or destination, the Smart Smoothing feature as part of the Smooth Transitions button makes that really easy. OK, last thing we need to do is actually build an interaction that goes from the welcome to the eat state. Right now, all the buttons that we have don't do anything, so we need to actually build out that interaction. So I want to go to the eat state when I click on the eat button. So with that button selected, I'm going to create an interaction. The interactions panel is where that takes place. So with that button selected, I want to add an interaction. All the interactions that you do in your application are always going to be created in the interactions panel. The interactions panel is also contextually aware of what you have selected. So if I have a button, I'm going to have different controls that are available to me than if I had, say, a data list or a scroll bar. So with that selected, I'm going to click the Add Interaction button. You can think of this list of drop-downs as a sentence. On click, I'm going to play a transition to a state. In this case, I'm going to play a transition to the eat state when I'm in any state. So let's read that again. On click, play a transition to state eat when in any state. If I click OK, that transition has now been created. If I click on the welcome button, I want to have it also go to the welcome. So let's go Add Interaction, on click, play transition to state welcome when in any state. This last option, when in any state, allows me to add in specific logic if I'm in particular states of my project. In this case, we want it to be consistent across all the states, so we just leave it as is. And I click OK. The last thing we need to accommodate is the fact that we set the eat state as the default state of our project last time. So let's go into Welcome, right-click, and say Set as Default. All right, let's run our project and see what we have. All right, so if I click on Eat, you notice that the transition that we built is then triggered, and we go from the welcome state to the eat state. Let me click on the welcome state and show you what happens. You notice that it goes back to the welcome state, but there was no smooth transition. That's because we actually didn't define that inside of Flash Catalyst. Each transition inside of Flash Catalyst, you need to specifically choreograph. So you can use all the features that we use to go from welcome to eat to define eat back to welcome. As you'll see when we continue working on the project in the next few videos, we're going to start taking some of the designs we have inside of Flash Catalyst, bring them into the Creative Suite 5 design tools of Illustrator and Photoshop, and then modify and have the full fidelity designs as part of our project.